trails and ghost towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts. Bill Barlee's here. This is the kind of show, Bill, that drives me crazy. This has got real gold in it,
Oh, yeah.
And great big bunches of it, too, when they finally get down to it.
Yeah, and one of the most fascinating characters who ever came into British Columbia, in the mining annals of British Columbia, a guy called John B. Hobson.
John B. What's the B stand for?
John Beauregard Hobson.
Sounds
Irishman.
I thought he was going to be a Southern American with a name like that.
Sounds like it. Irishman, born, I think, in Dublin, 1844. Comes to California as a kid, 13 years old, and is fascinated. This is the height of the rush. He gets there in 1857. So this is the height of the rush in California. Well, actually over the top of it, but still a lot of gold coming out of California. Yeah. A lot of it coming out of lode mines, and a lot of it coming out of placer mines, but hydraulic placer mines. So he then, his family has some money, Mike, and they send him to college or university. He comes out as a bona fide mining engineer with an interest, I think a latent interest even at that time, in placer mining. And of course, this is one of the great modes of operation and living in the 1850s and 60s in Western North America. He becomes, by the way, a valued employee of the mining Institute of California. He becomes a state employee, and he does a lot of the technical papers on all the gold fields of California. And in doing so, he acquires a knowledge of placer mining, specifically hydraulic mining, I think equal to none. He really was in a class by himself. Now, the interesting thing about J.B. Hobson, he's in California, he's there until he's about 48 years old, but at that time in Canada, there was a big rush, of course, in the all through
1858 is the Cariboo rush.
Sure, the Cariboo rush. But on the tail end of that Cariboo rush, a lot of Chinese miners came in, and they went up various rivers in the interior of the province. The Fraser, of course, is well known. We've mentioned it before. The Quesnel is well known. And this particular story kind of revolves around the Quesnel. So it revolves, essentially, we start at Quesnel Forks, and what happened there, of course, the miners branched north, and some of them went almost due east in kind of a southerly direction towards a horsefly country. And in doing so, they discovered a lot of coarse gold on the Quesnel River. In fact, there was an English firm that came in on the Quesnel River called the Golden River Quesnel Company, which was really rather interesting. They blocked off the whole river, and I alluded to it very briefly once before, some years ago, Mike. And they went in and mined 8,000 ounces on a place called Big Wheel Flat, not knowing that the Chinese had cleaned up most of this river out before, because the Chinese were excellent miners. Yeah. And this leads really back to what we're doing in Canada. In going over that river, they came across a number of bars in the river that were very, very rich. And some of these bars had a different type of gold on them, different than they were getting in the ordinary run of gold on the river.
So they would look different to the schooled eye. This is
sure.
One color, this is another.
Sure.
What
An experienced miner would say, look, if this doesn't come the river, so then they start looking up the banks of the river, and they always look for a gully or a gulch. And in several places, Rose's Gulch was an example on the north side of the river. On the south side of the river, there was Blackjack Gulch, and there were a number of other gulches. There was Blackjack Gulch and Dancing Bill's Gulch, and those are probably two of the major ones. Now, Dancing Bill's Gulch was probably named after a guy called Dancing Bill Latham. Blackjack, there were all sorts of blackjacks in the Cariboo. Can't tell who it was named after. So they follow these up, but they don't get gold that they like. But behind them comes the Chinese. And the Chinese, they look very carefully, excellent miners, Mike, and they discover a place in Blackjack Gulch, between Blackjack Gulch and Dancing Bill's Gulch, which they call the China Pit. And they put in a little hydraulic operation, which is kind of a nozzle with a monitor on it, and they start picking up some very, very good gold, fine gold, Mike. Well, the CPR is sitting up in Canada, the barons of the CPR. They've just made an awful lot of money. They're independently wealthy, each one of them, and they're sitting back, they're looking for places to put their money. Where are they going to park their money? They hear about the Cariboo. Somebody tells them about Dancing Bill's Gulch and Blackjack Gulch, and they decide that they're going to put some money in there. So they buy the ground off the Chinese and buy a whole bunch of claims in that area. But the CPR the moguls of the CPR are not really very familiar with
They're
placer
not gold
mining.
miners.
That's right. They
Okay.
aren't gold miners. So they say, who can we get? Who's the best gold miner around? Well, the word drifts in. There's a guy called J.B. Hobson in California, knows all about gold mining, knows all about hydraulicking. So they get in touch with J.B. Hobson in 1892. He is now 48 years old. He is in California, well employed, but they make such an attractive offer that he comes into Canada. And he comes into Canada, he comes into the Cariboo district, probably up from 150 Mile House, gets in there, looks at this ground, and falls in love with it. Now that's a mistake, Mike.
You never fall in love with gold ground. It doesn't, it's unrequited love, I
That's
take
right.
it.
You have to be very, very, very careful indeed that you don't fall in love with the ground. But he did fall in love with the ground. And he did a lot of mathematical calculations. And he came to the conclusion, Mike, that there would be $100 million in gold in that ground. Now, the ground was from 400 feet to 600 feet above the river. So you got a huge depth to go to get to bedrock. So he assumed also that the gold would probably get richer, as is the usual rule of thumb in placer mining. It usually gets richer as you go to bedrock. Didn't happen to be the case there, but he thought it would be, so he comes up with a figure of $100 million. This is pretty attractive. Now that's at $20 an ounce, Mike.
Yeah.
So here's a picture, by the way, of J.B. Hobson, very, very soon after he got into the Cariboo. He's about 52 years old
looks
here.
older. Gosh,
he does look older, yeah. Well, mining can be hard on people, okay? And I think it was hard on him. So this is taken about actually 1896, so he'd been in there about 4 years. And so he gets in there, and the first thing he has to do is he has to start putting a network of creeks together, okay?
Let's take a break here because we've got some friends. You've never seen this green plumbing around here before, and we're going to introduce you to the technology of hydraulicking when we come back from this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to John Beauregard Hobson's story on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We've been talking about the process for hydraulicking requires something hydraulic, water. How do they get water to this high ground when you go there? There's not a lot of water immediately accessible.
Not only that, the country around tends to be somewhat arid. There are creeks and there are lakes. So Hobson, being a very, very logical man, said, okay, where are the best lakes, where are the best creeks that we can draw from to feed water into the hydraulic operation on the Bullion Pit?
How far afield did he go to find them?
15 to 20 miles.
This was no small operation. This is a huge operation.
He had literally hundreds of men working on it. It starts at one of the major reservoirs, which is Pauley Lake. But he doesn't just draw from Pauley Lake, and you can see from this particular photograph that drawing from Pauley Lake, and there's a 4 or 5 foot
sluice or
what do you
whatever you
want, ditch, sure, whatever you want to call it. But he does that in Hazeltine Creek, and there's another photograph of Hazeltine Creek, and he does that in 6 Mile Creek as well, Mike. And so all this network of water gathering is really quite an operation.
And it's all funneled to
and it's
here.
all funneled eventually. It starts coming down the bank, coming down in 4 or 5 big pipes, and it comes down the bank in Dancing Bill's Gulch, and it eventually comes in to the pipes that lead into the hydraulic guns, which are called monitors or giants or whatever else you want to call it, okay?
Now you have a monitor right here. Now this is really a very small monitor. How big were the big ones blasting into the side hills?
Well, let me tell you about the monitor first, Mike,
go ahead.
I think I should have given you a little background because the guy who gave it to me was a very, very good miner. He worked on a creek called Poor Man Creek or Donovan Creek in the Cariboo and did very well, used this monitor. Now this is a 1 3/4 to 2 inch monitor. His name was Bill Smith, old friend of mine, and he carted this monitor down to me, and this is typical of the monitors. This is just a small one instead of a big one.
Okay.
You have a 22 instead of a 303, okay? And this is what it is.
This was a small caliber
That's
monitor.
right.
Okay.
And what happens is the water comes down a pipe like this. This is a graduated pipe. So that's wider here than it is down here. And this, in turn, goes into an operation like this, where it narrows down. And on top of this, of course, sits the gun.
And so all of the time, all of this narrowing taking place, the higher the pressure is becoming.
The higher the head or the higher the pressure.
Okay. So it goes into that nozzle, and you can see it's rounded, so this is obviously darn close to the business end.
Works something like a water pistol.
Yes.
Sure. And then it comes down into this, and this is the pipe getting narrower and narrower and narrower, which builds up the head. And what that does, it shoots into the bank and destroys the gravel. It washes the gravel down through a sluice box, and it comes right into the bank itself. And here's a couple of pictures, a monitor at operation in the Bullion Pit.
Now,
And
this is a big monitor. Now,
Oh, yeah,
how big were they?
this is probably a 12-inch monitor. A 12-inch monitor, if you were to get hit by a 12-inch monitor at 100 feet, they wouldn't find you.
Would just blow you apart.
Blow you to pieces. Absolutely blow you to pieces. So this is a 12-inch monitor, and the next photograph is a marvelous photograph, one of my favorites. And here's the water raining down, and this guy is operating this monitor with the balance box, and that's this little balance box here.
There's a box built right onto it, because no
That's right.
single man can hold back this kind of
Couldn't hold the pressure. Just couldn't hold the pressure. And he's washing down the bank, and this is a very, very wet job. Some of them loved it, Mike. Absolutely loved it. But you know,
Well, it's so destructive, you know. I mean,
right.
it just washes that side hill
right.
away, and
Yeah.
and you're really seeing you're making progress.
Sure. But they were getting small gold, Mike. Like that's
This
not there. Yeah,
this
I
is.
mean,
Oh, I love it when you bring
Yeah.
gold, though, Bill. It's important to me.
Well, that's typical of the gold that you would have got from the Bullion Pit. And he made a mistake, as I mentioned before. He thought it was going to be 20, 25 cents a yard. It was not 20 or 25 cents a yard. It was about 10 cents a yard, or just maybe 11, between 10 and 11 cents a yard. But the interesting thing, Mike, was in the first part of it, the first part, when they put it on that ground, they went to the China pit, and the Chinese miners were so good, they had the best part of the ground. Hobson didn't know it.
Yeah. So is that where they started? They started with the China
where
pit, and then they worked their way beyond that.
Yep.
Okay. Going to take a break here. Be back in just a second, and we'll show you the extent to which the Bullion Pit grew and some of the immense ingots, I guess, of gold that's been refined from this. Do that right after this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're talking about the Bullion Pit and John Beauregard Hobson and all of the wealth. About how long did it take him to get all of the network of water in place before he began producing?
Just over 2 years. So 1893, 1894, he's building up the water network. He gets it already. Starts piping in 1895 and does very well, Mike. Here's an example of some of the gold that he got out in 1895. Here, a couple of guards standing there. They're looking at these. These are dory bars. You know, this is how it comes
What
out.
is a dory bar?
Well, it's probably 97% pure, 96% pure. It has to be refined. And what they did now, they were afraid of people marching in. They thought that the thieves were on. They thought the thieves were going to be on the move, and they were going to grab some of this gold. So they poured it into a great big mold, which looks like kind of a bullet, a very large bullet. And this picture here, you can see the bullet, and that weighs about 203 pounds, Mike. So that's a lot. That's a lot of gold.
You don't put that across your horse's back. And,
Of course not. Of course
and
not.
the horses like to have them balanced, so you'd have to have
right.
another 200-pounder on the other
Well,
side.
and the CPR was looking for 400 pounds next year, and 500. But actually they did quite well. 1895, 1896, 1897, 98, 99, right up to 1900, except for the years where they were short of water, despite their system of their water network system. And 1900 was their banner year. But after 1900, because of weather conditions, because of a low snowpack and so on, it starts to go down very rapidly.
Production.
That's right. But to get more water, he has to pour more money into the ground. It isn't his money, it's CPR money. Okay, and the CPR is starting to say, hey, we've taken on a lot of gold, but we put more into the ground than we've taken out. And being the CPR, they're very careful of that, so they cut it off. They walk away from it.
What does John Beauregard, the man who's in love with the ground,
right.
do here?
Yeah, he's caught in that classic bind of the placer miner. He just says, well, I believe in this ground. So he goes back to New York, and he sees the Guggenheim family.
This is an important family.
Very, very wealthy family in corporate America in the 1890s and 1900s. And this is what he goes back about 1904 and 1905. Interests them with the photographs he has of the gold coming out of there. They think, well, the CPR's missed a bet. They invest. He spends in 1906 $200,000 of Guggenheim money. And he doesn't get much back because it's a bad year for water.
Now you multiply all of this by 40 to get to current
Yeah.
events. So if you multiply 200,000 by 40,
It's $8 million.
$8 million bucks
Yeah.
these people spend
Yeah.
on
Oh, yeah.
on a speculation.
Yeah, on a straight speculation with very, very small gold, as we know. So by 1906, they say, hey, we didn't do well. So they pull the pin in 1907. Here is John Beauregard Hobson, about this time, Mike. This is a picture of him. And
He even looks older now. I
Yeah,
mean, he's
that's
still
right.
not
He's-
an ancient guy.
No, he isn't. He's 1907. He's 53 years old.
Ooh.
He looks 83, and he feels 83. But this doesn't stop him. Like many placer men, he continues. He's following the rainbow, Mike. And what he does is he gets some friends together who believe in his genius, and he was a genius. There's no doubt about it. And he patches enough money together, so between 1907, 1908, and 1909, he gets the network of creeks and all the rest, the bridges, and then the camps and the reservoirs all ready again. He's ready to pipe, and by 1909, he thinks he's got her on the way. Bad year again for water. He waits for 1910. Now it's starting to break his heart. And indeed, it does break his heart. Because by 1911, he's a sick man. He's on the downhill slope. By 1912, he's a dead man. He dies on the January the 9th of 1912. That essentially is the end of John B. Hobson. Although he leaves behind, Mike, he leaves behind a monument. And the monument is the Bullion Pit. And you know, if you go and see that Bullion Pit today, you will recognize that it is indeed a monument.
Well, I have to apologize for this video. I shot this with my own little shaking hands.
Yeah.
When you stand at the edge of the Bullion Pit and look down, and there are still people working the Bullion Pit to this very day,
Sure.
it is a huge hole in the ground. And how long must it be? It must be a
Spectacular.
mile or 2 miles long?
Yeah, it's over a mile long and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet deep. You can get lost in the Bullion Pit.
And that entire
Yeah.
acreage was washed out with monitors
Yeah.
washing away the ancient gravel.
All done by man, the biggest in the world. Nothing touches the Bullion Pit. And the interesting thing is, although John B. Hobson goes, Mike, the work continues. People can't stay away from the Bullion Pit. So they work through the 20s intermittently, into the 30s intermittently, into the 40s. And here's a shot from the 40s. And this particular shot shows the riffle cleanup. And there's the riffles coming down. The riffles are, you lift those riffles up, and then you can see the men cleaning out the box. And this is the most intriguing part of mining, because you know how much gold you got after your run. You see, you're after your piping.
Until then, it's all just gravel.
That's
Now
right.
it becomes precious.
Yeah, that's right. And so they're packing all this gold together and they're weighing it out very, very carefully. They still don't make enough. And of course, then the operation of the bullion starts to slide down. And I think it's indicated in this photograph. Here's the big house, Hobson's big house, burning in the 1940s, I think it is. And I'm not sure it's 40s or early 50s. But there it is. Somebody caught the picture of the house going down. And with it really goes much of the bullion. Now, the bullion is still operating today, Mike.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about this area is this, is that I think that the Chinese miners first hit it. They knew. Guys like Wally and guys like Tom, who was really China Tom. There's a picture of him, by the way, Mike, and it's kind of a great picture.
This is China Tom.
Sure.
Now, he looks like a very
Sure.
lovely man. He's smiling,
Sure.
warm. Was he a warm man, or was this his sales face?
He was a very nice man. And he was a merchant, but he was a miner first. The merchant, the profit he made from being a merchant allowed him to go placer mining. And there's a letter to him.
Look
and
at
he's
that.
called
It's Mr. China Tom.
China Tom is Tom. And that's kind of interesting. And this is another letter here, Mike, from Wally, from the Wally Company in Quesnel, and one of their tokens. And that token is very interesting. It's worth $10.
It's made out of aluminum, and
Made
it's
out of aluminum.
been beat up a bit,
Yeah.
but that was a rare token, I take
Oh,
it.
yeah, they're very difficult tokens to get. There's some in the Quesnel Museum. And what happened, of course, this area, Mike, is really a fascinating area. And I'll tell you why it's a fascinating area. Because if you look through the entire area, if you put it under a very close scrutiny, you would find that on the north bank of the Quesnel River and Quesnel Lake, there are all sorts of hot spots. We talked about Cedar Creek before. Cedar Creek was spectacular, absolutely unbelievable. We've talked about Spanish Mountain before. It was the same. That was on the north side. We've talked about Rose's Gulch. That was on the north side. And all along that north side, where this town of Likely is now, even in some of the backyards in Likely, there's a fair amount of gold. And the same on the south side. Now, as you look down the river, as you cross into Likely, and you cross over the bridge there, and you look down the river, that north side is visible, and also the south side. The bullion was on the south side. Now, some people have come down that road on the south side from 150 Mile House, which is an easy way to get in.
Yeah.
They picked up nuggets right on the road after a rain. Nuggets. So what it tells me is that through that area, at one time, probably many, many thousands of years ago, there was a magnificent river came right through this area, carrying a lot of gold. That's why that gold is up 600 feet, 700 feet, 800 feet, 400 feet, way above the river. Some of the gold is entirely different. Some of it is still intact, Mike. There are some places where there's coarse gold, some places where there's very, very fine gold and light gold and scaly gold. Yeah. But I think that in that area, that if you examine it very, very closely, a very fine placer man is going to come in someday, and he's going to go over it with like a fine-tooth comb. And he will put it all together, because there is, I think, an interrupted run. Now, Mike, an interrupted run means you get rich gold, and then suddenly it'll disappear. That may be because of glaciations. This may be a tertiary channel, pre-glacial, on either side of the river, you see? And miners have tapped into that area for the past century. In fact, they're still working the Bullion Pit today and working a lot of areas that they worked 100 years ago on that.
And they seem pretty serious today, too. The signs are up, no trespassing, active mining, prosecution against trespassers.
Yeah.
Gold is a serious commodity.
Oh, sure it is. Oh, sure it is. I think that this particular area will lead to a magnificent discovery, maybe in the next 5 years, maybe 20 years from now, maybe 50 years from now. But I think somebody's going to put together all the pieces of this puzzle, and they'll find out where that channel is going. And I think that will happen. It might happen to an amateur, probably will happen to a professional placer man.
Now, you couldn't go in there at this stage of our civilization and use monitors the way these guys did. I mean, that's a pollution disaster, I guess.
Of course you could.
But this would be open pit mining of an immense nature.
Oh, sure it would. Well, it would have to be open pit, and it would have to be probably, the values might vary from a couple of dollars a yard, Mike, right up to $1,000 a yard. I mean, the Cedar Creek was over $1,000 a yard.
We haven't found all the gold that's in place yet, have we?
No, of course not. Of course not.
There was another little artifact here that I just wanted to take a look at, and it had to do with Tom, and it's a wonderful little receipt that also, I mean, when you find a little piece of paper like this, you really find more than just an anecdote.
Yeah,
right?
you do.
This is from Tom. It's a sum of $2.50 received, 700 feet of Crete claims.
Yeah.
But included on this is a list of all of his relatives.
That's right.
Where did you find this?
Well, actually, I purchased that many, many years ago, and got it from a woman called Winifred Nielsen, who gave me some marvelous, marvelous material. I purchased some items from her, and she thought I was very fair in my price, and she gave me this amongst about 300 other pieces of very, very important material.
Now, lim, lung, dak, kun, I can't quite read that one, and funak.
Funak is a cousin. The others are that is the surname comes first in Chinese. Barley, Bill. Roberts, Mike. Okay, that's how you'd be referred to.
And this is from 1897.
1897, practically 100 years ago.
Thank you, Bill.
You're
That
welcome.
is the Bullion Pit, a fascinating story. We'll see you next time on Gold Trail.